Constitution and events leading up to it. So this timeline refers to a bunch of the things that we've already gone over. You guys are familiar with it. We've talked about these events in some detail. So before we get started, I'm going to just ask for you guys to refresh your brains by giving me some examples of things we've talked about. Can I have some volunteers? Katarina?
The Stamp Act.
The Stamp Act. Do you remember what the Stamp Act was about?
They raised the taxes on the stamps.
Correct. Does someone else have something to agree or to add to that? Another event that we've talked about or something else about the Stamp Act? Carrie, do you have something?
The Sugar Act.
The Sugar Act. What happened with the Sugar Act?
I don't remember.
Okay, that's actually very similar to what Katarina was talking about. Several of these acts have to do with them raising taxes, which is making the colonists very unhappy. What are colonists? Does anyone know what colonists are? Rihanna.
People that live in a colony.
Good answer. So what is a colony? Do you know what a colony is, Rihanna?
A piece of land.
A piece of land. A colonist is someone who lives in a general area, a colony. You're right. And the Americans were considered colonists. Okay, so today we're going to be talking about the Boston Tea Party. Does anyone know what the Boston Tea Party is? Raise your hand if you think you know. Do you have any idea? Okay, so nobody has any idea what it is. You haven't heard of this at all. We've talked about the Tea Act already. We talked about that slightly last time. We talked about how they raised taxes on the tea. So in your groups that you're already in, I'm going to have you discuss the Boston Tea Party and the Tea Act and see if you can come up with some kind of an answer as to what you think the Boston Tea Party might be. I'm going to give you guys just a minute or so to do that, and I'm going to come around to you and you can either give me your answer written down on your piece of paper that you have in front of me, or you can tell me orally. So you can either tell me out loud or you can write it down. So let you guys go ahead and discuss for a couple minutes.
And they don't just put the tea into the Boston Harbor.
We're so smart.
Muy bien.
Gracias. Do you guys have an idea?
Yeah, the colonists dressed up like Native Americans, and they went onto the ships that had the tea on them and dumped all the tea into the Boston Harbor.
Wow, you know a lot about it. I'm impressed. Have you heard that somewhere in your at home or in other classes?
On TV.
On TV. Sometimes you can learn things from TV. Do you guys have an answer? Something that you came up with?
I just think the Boston people were really mad that they were raising their prices for tea and they really wanted to drink more of it and they couldn't.
That's a very good answer, and we're going to look and see which answer is most correct. So, first of all, we're going to look at this timeline, because that's what we've been doing in all of our lessons. We've been putting our events on the timeline. So, the Boston Tea Party took place on December 16th of 1773. So, if any of you can, or while you're in your groups, I'm going to let you go ahead and discuss where you think this Boston Tea Party would go on our timeline right here. Okay, so I'm going to let you discuss it for a couple minutes, and then I'll bring around a smaller timeline and you guys can show me where it's at. Okay, so you guys have about 30 minutes to discuss. Go.
I bet it happened around the tea.
Before the battle. I think it's after the tea.
But before the battle of
Yes.
Lexington? Lebanon?
Lexington. Yeah. So,
I have no idea what it was. I don't remember. I wasn't paying attention.
Okay. Are you guys ready?
Yes.
yeah.
Okay. On this timeline, I'm going to let you look at it for a couple seconds and point to where you think it would belong on this timeline.
Somewhere in here.
Okay, remember I said the Boston Tea Act took place on December 16th, 1773. So where on that map is 1773? Yes. So it would go right in this area. So you guys were right. This group, do you guys have an answer?
We think so.
Okay, I'm going to let you look at this for a minute and let's see if you can decide where you think it should go on this this year right here. What year is this? 1773. Correct. And the Tea Act happened on May 10th, and the Boston Tea Party happened on December 16th. So you guys are exactly right. So here in just a minute, I'm going to go ahead and put that up on our board. First, though, we talked about the Boston Tea Party, and I was wondering if any of you know where on this map the Boston is. Alicia, would you like to come show me?
It's right here.
Excellent. That's exactly where it's at. This is where Boston is, right over here, which is actually important because it's close to the water, which is where the boat is going to take. Okay, so now I'm going to read you a little excerpt from this book, the introduction, and we're going to, part of your homework will be to finish reading this book, since we don't have time for the introduction. So, here's this lovely picture of the arbor. Some of the words in here might be a little bit tricky because they're ones that we haven't talked about a lot. We've talked about most of them a little bit, but we haven't talked about all of them. So we talked about colonists. In previous classes, we've talked about things like defiance, tyranny, and liberty. So a couple of these words are new. We have parliament, which is basically the government in Britain. We have a province, which is kind of like a colony. It's a designated area. It's kind of like states or counties. Legislature is a lot like parliament. It's just a government organization. And hoisted is just a fancy word for saying to lift, to pick up, to move. And boycott is something that you decide not to do. Like if you don't want to drink tea, that's boycotting. If you decide, I'm not going to eat at Sonic ever again for the rest of my life, you are boycotting Sonic. Thumbs up if you understand? Okay, great. Okay, so the Boston Tea Party was a time when a bunch of colonists who lived in Boston were really upset because of the Tea Act. They thought that paying taxes wasn't the problem, but they felt like paying taxes to someone who they didn't know and they had no say in the matter shouldn't be okay. So they thought they should have their own government to which they paid taxes. So one night, in order to rebel against against the tax on the tea, they dressed up as Indians, as Mohawk Indians. It wasn't a very clever disguise. They didn't do a very good job. They just made themselves so that you couldn't tell who they were. So they made themselves look like Indians, and then they ran on these ships. There were 3 of them. They ran to 3 ships, and they dumped all of the tea over the edge. So that's kind of what Katerina was telling us earlier. They dumped all of the tea into the ocean as their way of saying that they weren't going to pay taxes. So that being said, I'm going to go ahead and tell you your homework now before we do our next activity. This book, The Boston Tea Party, you each are going to have a copy of it, and you're going to take it home, and I'm going to have you read it. It's a really fun story. I think you're going to like it a lot. And when you come back, I want you to bring one thing that you liked about it and one question that you have. Okay? So that's going to be your homework, but we'll get to that again later. The next thing that we're going to do is we've been doing a lot of writing lately. We've been working on narrative, we've been working on paragraph and sentence structure. And so what I'm going to have you do now is on the paper that I have given you, it's in front of you, you're going to go ahead and write a short paragraph, about 3 to 5 sentences. And in this paragraph, you're going to include at least 2 of the words that are up here, because these are new vocabulary words that I'm going to add to the word wall later. So I want you to include at least 2 of those words in your paragraph. And the paragraph is supposed to be about how you think you would have acted if you'd been in Boston during this time, during the Boston Tea Party. Do you think you would have been a participant? Do you think you would have looked on? Do you think you would have agreed or disagreed? So those are some things to think about, and I'm going to give you just a few minutes to go ahead and get started on that. Now come around and look at your ideas. question or need help, feel free to ask me. If you can ask the people in your groups as well, you guys are welcome to brainstorm together. But if you need me to answer a question, I'm ready. Is this right? Can you read it aloud for me, please?
I know in Tea Party, I can see that you are incorporating a lot of your knowledge of both English and Spanish into this, and that's good. But maybe think about some of these words that we've talked about up here, and think about what some of them mean. Do you know what a colonist is? Do you know that? People in land. Land. Good. Thank you for helping her. That's great. Yes. So let's say you're a colonist. Let's pretend you're a colonist. Okay. You're here during this tea party. You wrote it here.
Mm-hmm.
Would you help? Would you not help?
Help.
Help. Okay. So maybe say something about you are a colonist and whether you would help or not help. Can you do that for me? Yes. Okay.
Something else I forgot to mention when I was telling you this right now, if it would be easier for you to come and speak with me about your paragraph rather than writing it down, and I can assist you in that, that would be fine. That's a good way that I can also assess your understanding of the content. So. Thank you.
This is really good.
Thank you.
I feel like this girl.
Ah, you already have to use the word. That's great.
How long is the paragraph?
3 to 5 sentences. It doesn't have to be very long. Just long enough to get your point across is fine. Okay, we're gonna have time to finish these in just a few minutes, and we're going to, or in a little bit, we'll finish them, and we'll have a chance that you guys can share with the class what you wrote down if you would like. That's an only if you want to kind of thing. But first, we're gonna take a little break from it for right now, and we're gonna review some of the concepts that we have talked about today. So I'm gonna ask a couple questions, like I told you earlier I would. If you think you know it, raise your hand. I'll call on a couple of you if you're not participating. Okay. Question. What was the reason for dumping all of the tea into the ocean?
Because they were mad.
That's correct, Drew. Next time, maybe can you raise your hand so that if everybody knows the answer, we have everybody has an opportunity to share. Thanks. Emily, do you know how the colonists were dressed for the Boston Tea Party?
Indians.
Indians, very good. They put like soot on themselves and like darkened their skin so that they didn't look like American colonists. Carrie, how was the Boston Tea Party an act of independence?
They were mad at the other country for putting the tax on their tea, so they wanted to go against them because they didn't think it was fair that another country would get the money. So they were dumping it into the harbor as independence from that country.
Because they weren't supposed to do that.
Yes.
That may be an act of what vocabulary word, Katarina?
Defiance.
Defiance, excellent. They were being defiant and seeking independence by doing this act. Rihanna, how did the Boston Tea Party change America?
There was less tea.
That's true. There was a lot less tea. Americans liked tea. That's something I didn't mention, but you will read about in this book. Americans really like tea, and so it was really hard for them to go without. Okay, we're going to return to this subject again next class, but for now it's time to switch subjects.